All right, so this is going to be a very quick video to talk about a tricky issue that a lot of coding beginners deal with when it comes to CSS. And that is the issue of CSS specificity. And that basically happens whenever you have multiple CSS rules that target the same element, and the CSS rule that you expect to be applied is not being applied. It is being overridden by another rule that comes higher up, right? Because most people think that CSS executes straight from the top to the bottom, right? But that's not always the case, because anytime that you have multiple CSS rules that target the same element, the browser has to figure out like, okay, which one do I apply? And it doesn't do that by just applying the rule that comes at the very end or the most recent rule. It doesn't always do that, all right? So basically, the browser has a set of rules that it follows to actually calculate and determine which CSS rule to apply whenever multiple rules are targeting the same element. And the best way to just really explain this is by using an example, right? So here I have this list of all my favorite sports, right? So basically this is a UL element with an ID attribute of favorite sports. And then inside of that list, I have a class attribute favorite on this list item, basketball, because basketball is my favorite sport. Well, it's actually ping pong. Anyways, and then on the right, I have my CSS rules, right? I have my CSS code that is changing the font color of all these elements, right? So basically this rule up here is targeting every list item inside of an element that has the ID favorite sports. So that is targeting all of these list items here, and it is setting the color to red. This CSS rule is targeting whatever element has a class attribute of favorite and is setting the color to green. So my question to you is, what color is basketball going to be, right? You see that we have this class attribute here and the color is set to green. Is the color of basketball going to be green, or is it going to be red? Most people are going to say green because, oh, they see like this CSS rule is targeting this element, so of course the color should be green. But the thing is, this CSS rule is also targeting that same element, right? Because that element is a list item. So the browser now has to try to figure out like, all right, what do I do? Which one do I apply? Let's see if you guess correctly here. Well, I mean, I'm sure that you probably guessed that it's not going to be green, all right? Which is why I'm making this video. So if I click output, everything is red. Like everything is red. And that is where we now have to understand this whole concept of CSS specificity. If you're watching this video, that means you're interested in learning to code and making a career switch to becoming a software engineer. And that's exactly what I did. My name is TJ Oyeniyi, and I'm a self-taught software engineer that still works as a software engineer while teaching complete beginners like yourself how to code and help them to get jobs as software engineers by working with them as their mentor. To learn more about working with me as your mentor, check out my coding bootcamp, Roots Technology. I'll put the link in the description below as well. All right. The browser has a set of rules in terms of how it determines what CSS rule to apply whenever multiple rules are being applied to the same element. And those rules go like this. So there is a hierarchy. Inline styles have to, so basically here, the more specific your CSS code is, the higher the specificity value that the browser gives it. So the reason that the browser is executing this CSS rule instead of this one is because this one at the top is more specific, right? Because basically this is using two criterias to target something, right? The actual ID attribute and the element selector, because this is targeting every list item inside of an element that has an ID attribute of favorite sport. So it's using two criterias, and two is higher than one, right? Because this is just targeting based on a class attribute. So this one at the top, it's more specific. So the browser is going to prioritize that and give it a higher specificity value. Man, that word is a mouthful. Specificity. Anyways, there are certain rules that you have to understand when it comes to this, right? So inline styles have the highest specificity value. Oh my God, how many times am I going to say specificity in this video? But look, inline styles have the highest specificity value. All right. So like if I write a inline style here, so let's do a style equals, and I'll set the color to yellow. Boom. You see? That works, right? Like that works. Inline styles has the highest specificity value, but you shouldn't really be doing inline styles. If you have a CSS file, you should be separating concerns, right? You should keep your HTML in your HTML file and your CSS code in your CSS file. That way it's just easier for other engineers to know where stuff is without them having to discover that, oh, even though I'm looking in the CSS code is actually executing isn't in here. It's in the HTML. All right. So just keep things separate. All right. But anyways, inline styles have the highest specificity value. That is then followed by elements that have an ID attribute on them. So ID attributes have the second highest specificity value. If you're learning a lot in this video, keep in mind, this is what learning to code with me as your mentor is like. Anytime you get stuck and you need help, you can schedule a Zoom call with me where we work one-on-one together on an issue like this. Or you can just email me and I'll get back to you that way. But having a mentor there to guide you and ask questions to is the best way to speed up your coding journey so that you're not wasting time being stuck or working on things that don't matter. So if you're ready to start your coding journey and become a software engineer, come join me in my coding bootcamp at www.rootstechnology.info. And then that is followed by class attributes. So class attributes have a lower specificity value than ID attributes do, right? Which can kind of, help you understand this here. And the least specific is the element selector, right? It's the element selector. But one thing, there is something that overrides the inline styles, right? Like remember, inline styles has the highest specificity value. And the one exception or the one way that you can override an inline style is if you use the exclamation important, right? So if I go here to favorite and I put importance, the browser is always going to prioritize this above all else, but you shouldn't be writing important all over your CSS code. All right. You shouldn't be doing that. Just increase the specificity of the CSS rule or of the element that you are targeting. All right. So let me just kind of tell you really quick, like anytime that the browser is trying to calculate these things, you basically start at zero. You start at zero. And inline styles, you add 1,000, right? Because inline styles has the highest specificity. So you add 1,000. ID has the next highest, right? But guess what you add for the ID? You just add 100. You just add 100 for an ID attribute. And a class attribute is even less. You add 10 for a class attribute. And guess what you add for an element selector? You add 1, right? So you see inline styles, you add 1,000. IDs, you add 100. A class attribute, you add 10. And the element selector, you add 1. So that's why inline styles has the highest specificity values, because that is how the browser calculates those things. So it's just really important for you to understand this so that anytime that you run into this issue where you are writing CSS code to target an element, but your code doesn't seem to be working, you're not crazy. All right. You are not crazy. There is no error in the code per se. It's just that the CSS rule that you're writing has a lower specificity value than whatever other code in your CSS is overriding it. All right. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully this example helped you to kind of really understand what's going on. But even if not, I'm going to include a link to a resource that you can read to just see more examples and to actually kind of see how these rules are being calculated. Okay. Let me tell you how learning to code changed my life. I went from making $37,000 a year and living paycheck to paycheck to my first job as a software engineer paid me $75,000 a year. That's almost double what I was making before. So now I don't have to fly Spirit Airlines all the time anymore, and I can actually afford a real vacation. And since I change jobs every 1 to 2 years, I started making 6 figures my 3rd year as a software engineer. That's what this career change can do for you. Now I have the skills to learn anything technical and get a job in a lot of different roles and industries because of my technical skills. So don't waste time putting off learning to code if you know you're interested in making a career change. Get started now so you can be ready to start applying to jobs soon. Come learn to code with me as your mentor at rootstechnology.info.